We have Congresswoman Barbara Lee, Congresswoman TERRI Sewell, Congressman EMANUEL CLEAVER, and Congressman Hank Johnson. I just wanted to talk to you all about Congressman Lewis's record as a legislator. We've heard so much over the course of the last week, and much of the conversation has been about who Mr. Lewis was walking across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. But people don't often understand that after he crossed this bridge, he walked into a very robust career as a public servant and as an elected official. And you all saw that up close and personal, not only as a fellow legislator and colleague, but also as a friend. And so the first question I have for you all is really more of a rapid round, because we also have heard so much of the seriousness about Mr. Lewis. But what's your most memorable or your funniest moment that you shared with Congressman Lewis? And I will start with you, Ms. Sewell, because you're already smiling, so you must have one.
Oh, listen, I just am in awe of John. You know, growing up in Selma and getting a chance year after year to see the foot soldiers come back to reenact Bloody Sunday, and then to grow up and be able to call John Lewis my colleague was such an honor. We had a special connection because of Selma, and I shared 10 times. I know that Barbara Lee has probably been on that pilgrimage more than that, but for 10 times, the whole 10 years I've been in Congress, I've had an opportunity to co-host the Faith and Politics pilgrimage. The opportunity to walk in the footsteps of John Lewis with John Lewis through Birmingham, Montgomery, and then Selma is a treat of a lifetime. I think that to me, the pinch me moments that I had with John are the private moments that we had on that bus going from Selma to Montgomery. And, you know, I would laugh and call him the boy from Troy, and he called me the girl from Selma. And we laugh about how far this state, our state has come, and our nation has come. And I would always say, but old battles have become new again. And he would remind me with that, you know, grin of his, that effervescence. He exuded love. It poured out of him. His whole life was really a living embodiment of the triumph of love over hate. And he would say, but Sewell, you know, the best days of this nation are ahead of us. And I'm like, but John. And it was always that optimism. You know, my heart is heavy because I just wonder how we're going to restore the Voting Rights Act without John. He was so much the face of it, the voice of it. And while I know he gave us the roadmap, we can all close our eyes and hear him. He was consistent. And every time he would talk about it on that bridge, the apex of that bridge, he would say it over and over again. But it still seems, it just seems like a daunting task without him.
Yeah, I understand that for sure. How about you, Mr. Johnson?
Well, I smiled at your question because there have been so many times that I have been on flights with Congressman Lewis and walked through the airports with him, and just to marvel at how people just instantly connect with him. They don't feel ill at ease in approaching him. I mean, now I'm a different kind of guy. People see me and they might say, hey, but you know, they feel a little reticent to come and approach me and start talking. But with somebody like John Lewis, I mean, people, even children, just walking up to him, and then to see him interacting with people brought a smile to my face. And also, all of the times that I've seen him dancing in public, we've had a couple of instances where we've been together and that happy song breaks out, and he always starts dancing on it. When he starts dancing, he just starts moving, and then other people come and join in, and it's just really a happy affair. And so to see him, you know, I've seen him unguarded like that. He's not really a guarded individual, but you know, to see him just let loose so many times just really brings a smile to my eyes and makes me appreciate how much of a people person that John Lewis was.
Love that. How about you, Miss Lee?
Well, thanks a lot, Angela, for this conversation tonight. Yeah, it's been a pretty emotional day, an emotional week, really a year that, you know, we knew one day this day would come, but we didn't expect it to ever come. And I can't imagine a world without John Lewis. It's still hard to come to grips with. It's quite frankly surreal. And so I'm glad you asked about funny moments to help us through this. John had quite a sense of humor, as everyone knows. And just one moment that was so, it cracked me up. When 45 was elected, right, or, you know, the occupant of the White House, you know, there was some debate about who's going to go to the inauguration, who's not going to go. Who's going to go, who's not going to go. Some wanted to go and wear kente fine in your face. Some were not sure. And I was one who said, no, I'm ready to go and walk out. So John and I talked about this, and he says, you gonna go? I said, you gonna go? And we both said, no, neither one of us are gonna go at the same time. And so he gave me that kind of backbone and courage I needed to boycott that inauguration. But he took it even further. I said, okay, John, what are they gonna say about you not going? I mean, they expect me to do something crazy. He
That's
said,
right.
I'm gonna say, okay, Cleaver.
You know, I didn't go. You know, John didn't go. I didn't go. I'm like, you know.
Yeah. So John told me, he says, I'm gonna say he's an illegitimate president and call him a racist. I said, you are? He said, yes, Barbara, I'm gonna say that. You gotta speak the truth. That really like took me aback. Said, yeah. Okay. And that was John in his, I think, best moments, you know, for me to witness and be with him in a joking kind of way, because it was really funny to walk to that point. And though I think that was an example of how he always said, you got to speak the truth. You know, don't back down. You've got to keep moving forward, but you have to tell the truth. And that's what, you know, when you start dancing around issues, John would cut straight to the chase and say, it's truth telling time. So, you know, we're going to have to remember that about John as we do our work and pick up this baton. Because on Capitol Hill, so often we kind of fudge stuff. You know, sometimes we have to nuance words. Sometimes we do, you know, say it this way versus that way. Well, John was a straight shooter, and he said what was on his mind and what he believed in and what was in his heart. It was always right.
I love that. And so, speaking of illegitimate presidencies, now I go to the man who writes those weekly devotionals and was the Civility Caucus co-chair, Congressman EMANUEL CLEAVER, who I don't think disagrees too much with an illegitimate presidency, but I do want to come to you because you are a jokester yourself. So I know you've got a story or two.
I sure do. Let me tell you, first of all, I grew up in Southern Christian Leadership Conference. John Lewis never was a part of the SCLC. People thought that he was, but he was actually connected more to Dr. King than to the organization. When he came across the bridge, if you would look at the footage, if the people who are viewing this ever see the footage again, John Lewis is walking next to a guy whose name was Hosea Williams, who attended Morehouse. He was a chemist by training. Neither one of them could swim. And people in SCLC said, they don't have to beat John Lewis and Hosea, just throw them over in the water. That'll end that part of the movement right there. But it went a little further. 10 years ago, John Lewis, along with my wife, Steny Hoyer, and Roy Blunt and his wife, we ended up in Australia together, and we went out on a boat one day to the coral reefs. And if you've been out there, it's the most beautiful thing in the world. You can see these white coral reefs under the water. So Hoyer puts on his leather swim stuff, rubber swim stuff. Everybody gets ready to jump in the water. My wife jumps right out there in the ocean. John Lewis can't swim. So John Lewis puts on his diving gear. Let me say here, I got some witnesses on this. So John Lewis puts on his diving gear. and he allows 3 men to talk to him, not to get into a swimming pool, not the Alabama River, but the ocean. And he gets out in the water with 3 men around him, and John can't swim a lick. All he can do is, and he's hitting the water just like this, and they're holding him up. And so John comes back in the boat, and I take him in the back of the boat. Michael was there with him. So we go in the back, and I say, John, you know, if anybody ever tells me that you don't mean what you say and that you believe and love everybody, I said, here we are out here in the ocean off the coast of Australia. You get out in the boat depending on 3 white men that you don't even know to hold you up. And I said, so I know you believe what you say. But the other part of it, just so your viewers won't get the wrong impression, John Lewis can't dance. Now, he can move, but John,
yeah, he doesn't have any rhythm.
Yeah, I mean,
he has a rhythm all his own.
That is,
yeah, he dances to his own rhythm.
That's right.
There's a happy dance. Nobody else could do the happy dance like he did.
Yeah, that's right.
Protect him, Miss Lee. All this shade, y'all got.
That's right.
Mr. Cleaver, I guess that means that we'll be seeing a video of you soon dancing then. It sounds like a challenge. We still got Mr. Lewis's happy video, so it'll just have to be that kind of challenge. I so appreciate that because so often, and I think you all know this, but as a past CBC executive director, I see you all as CBC family. And so I'm super protective of you all as humans first. And so I think it's so important for members of the audience and the viewing public to recognize that you all are human beings. And you're not just grieving the loss of a colleague, but also of a dear loved one. Congresswoman Sewell, to that point, you worked diligently to ensure that Mr. Lewis would be able to lie in state in the Alabama state capitol. Can you talk to us a little bit about that journey?
I just wanted John to have the hero's welcome that he deserved as Alabama's native son. And it was my honor to approach our governor about allowing John not only to cross that bridge one more time, but to be welcomed into the state capitol. When you think about his first time that he made that crossing, he wasn't invited in. But it was really important to me that we allowed John to have the hero's welcome he deserved. And so the governor and her chief of staff, it was great that her chief of staff was Joe Bonner. You know, Joe was a member of Congress representing Mobile. He's now the chief of staff for the governor. And Joe saw the vision and was just so helpful. And we were able to get John in that horse-drawn carriage. I don't know if you saw it, from Brown Chapel, that final bridge crossing. And it was so moving and so wonderful. And people came out, Selma came out, and you know, there was rose petals on that bridge and just John. And then for that hearse to, well, first of all, for the apex of the bridge, I don't know if you saw the Alabama state troopers saluting John. It was just important to me. I don't know if they mentioned it, but John is the first African-American ever to lie in state in the Alabama State House. And the last person to lay in state in the Alabama State House was George Wallace. So what perfect bookend for my state to have John Lewis be the last person to lie in state, and to have the governor welcome him and the Alabama delegation welcome him was so befitting. You know, it was a proud moment for the state of Alabama. Now, we obviously have a lot of work to do. We have a bridge that needs to be renamed. We have a whole bunch of other stuff that we need to do. But clearly the most befitting tribute to John is if we in Congress can truly restore the Voting Rights Act to its full strength and its full protections by passing, and we have renamed H.R. 4, the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Act of 2020. But you know, it was a proud moment for the state of Alabama. It was a proud moment for his family, just to see his family from Troy, Alabama come up those Capitol steps, to see the military escort, the fact that that John may have once been denied access to the State House, to have him lie in state, and the overwhelming welcome. And people were standing out there for hours. There was a big thunderstorm, but people still stayed out there. It was just, it was wonderful. I wish it was sort of like, and Barbara, you were on that pilgrimage when the first governor of Alabama, maybe 4 years ago, welcomed the whole delegation in and had a dinner in John's honor.
There.
That was 4 years ago.
Yeah.
On Faith and Politics. Yeah.
Come full circle, TERRI.
It's come full circle, exactly. It's come full circle. And, we are just so proud. I know that he may have represented Georgia's 5th District for 30 plus years. He'll always be Alabama's native son. And we share that. We share him and that respect. And I was happy that he got a hero's welcome back from the state of Alabama.
I love that. Congressman CLEAVER, to the point around voting rights and with this new name for HR 4, the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Act of 2020, you've talked about, particularly around civility, you've said our failure to come together to solve our nation's problems continues to put our shared future in jeopardy. And when you think about that specifically around something that should be nonpartisan, like voting rights, what do you think you can say to your Republican colleagues who haven't been as eager to pass this legislation? Of course, it passed the House, but as President Obama challenged us today, we know that it has to go much further to really ensure that folks have the voting rights protections they need to ensure a full and fair election and a democracy that continues to be strengthened.
Well, I think that many of the people who are on the other side, on the Republican side, do in fact understand that that Voting Rights Act needs to be updated so that it complies with the Supreme Court edict that essentially allows people to move voting booths, voting places around and so forth without any pre-clearance. But I think that the issue for people on the other side is right and wrong. And I thought that something happened today that I hope the nation caught, and that is when President Obama mentioned that both George W. Bush and George H.W. Bush both just almost automatically signed the voting rights law back into existence without any debate, without any problems. And so this is an aberration. And for them, I would not want to be in Congress in a position when something could be done that would be in harmony with my faith, that would be in harmony with my political philosophy, my theology, and then I failed to do it because I'm afraid of how somebody else in my on my tribe or in my tribe might view it. This is the time for people to stand up and be right and say, the blood of righteousness flows through my veins and I shall not be moved. I'm voting for it. And I think that there are enough of people on the other side who can vote for it and make it into a law. I hope that they will get beyond their fear. I think right now it's fear of what somebody might tweet. And, I'm glad I don't do all of that because, I was telling my children I never have in my life been scared of a tweet. I grew up in public housing. A lot of things that I was scared of, but never a tweet. And so, and I would say to these people who tweet, if you tweet it, you might have to eat it. So I think that at this moment, we have a chance to see something happen as a result of the funeral today. The charge was given by both of the Bushes.
And John wrote a wonderful op-ed that was published today that,
Yes.
Just reminds us of what we have to do, And you think about voting rights, it should be nonpartisan. It was. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was reauthorized 4 times under 2 Republican presidents,
Yeah.
as well as 2 Democratic presidents.
That's exactly right. And when you think about what this really drives home, it's the fact that action is required. You all don't just tout empty words. You all say exactly what you mean and then act on it. And to that point, Mr. Johnson, Jimmy Carter, we know, named Congressman Lewis to be Director of Action, speaking of, which is a federal agency for volunteerism. And while our jobs initiative, while I was CBC Executive Director, was not volunteer efforts, I know you will recall in Atlanta, during the jobs initiative stop there were so many people lined up outside and the cars were backed up so far that it was literally causing traffic congestion on the freeway. And Mr. Lewis's first mind was to say, it's hot out there, the people are thirsty. He rolls up his sleeves and has the staff carry out water so he can hand out water himself. I know that because you all share Atlanta in your congressional districts, you've experienced that same type of effort from him, that same type of work ethic. Can you talk to us about another moment that you've shared with Mr. Lewis because of your shared congressional districts, or at least your overlapping congressional districts?
Yes, the culmination of all of our encounters has to be described as that of a teacher and a student. Congressman Lewis was always one to share his experience. He didn't like wear his experience on his sleeve. I mean, but he would find a way of making sure that you understood history. And he didn't force it on you, but he kind of like just laid it out there for you. So he was a guy that wanted me and others to know of the civil rights movement and all of the moments during which important things happen, and giving you the background in terms of, you know, what led up to it. And so Congressman Lewis was a teacher, and he was also, if he had a subject that I would have to assign to him, it would be the subject of history. He was a teacher of history of the civil rights movement and the players in that movement. And I think that's a way of describing the kind of legislator that Congressman Lewis was. He was someone who, you know, right now we have, he was so far ahead of himself. I mean, right now we have people taking names off of buildings and removing Confederate symbols. But John Lewis started the work of renaming federal buildings just as soon as he got into office. For an example, the federal courthouse in Atlanta, the old federal courthouse in Atlanta, I don't know what the name of it was before it was changed to the Martin Luther King Jr. building, because they built a new courthouse, but they still use that federal building that used to be the courthouse for federal purposes. And Congressman Lewis, I think his first act as a congressman, his first piece of legislation that actually he introduced and got passed, of course you got to pass things, you got to have Republican support as you pass things. You have to have a president that will sign it. And so all of the work that goes into getting the bill to come to fruition, to rename that building to the Martin Luther King Jr. federal building, it still stands in Atlanta today. That was his very first act. And the reason why that is so important, because people may say that, well, naming buildings and this kind of thing is not important. What we see today is why it is so important, because other folks had an opportunity to name their buildings for their heroes. And John Lewis started the march to name buildings after civil rights heroes, not just blacks, but whites also. And so he was a serious legislator served for 34 years, and if you look back over that history of service, it is littered or riddled or, I mean, those are not the right words, but it is populated by measures that that rename buildings for people who were important to the civil rights movement.
And also to preserve history. I mean, we have to remember that it was John's legislation that got the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And I know you all were there when he was time and time again introducing it. And it was George W. Bush that signed it into law, and it was Barack Obama who got to cut the ribbon and open it up. But the reality is that even it was John's initial legislation to study doing the National Park Service trail from Selma to Montgomery. Now, I'm grateful for that because he gave us the enabling law, and that gave me the foothold to get those interpretive centers. But the reality is that John was about the business of preserving the history, our history, and making sure that future generations understood that.
Angela, can I follow up with that on that point before you ask me a question? When I came to Congress in '98, I think John led the effort. It started in 1999. A lot of people don't know this. John led the effort through legislation with Joe Scarborough, Tim Romer, and Jack Quinn to rename the Department of Justice the Robert F. Kennedy Department of Justice. And Bush, you know, the legislation was almost done, and Bush decided to go on and rename that building before the fight started in the House. And it may have actually gotten to the Senate, but if it hadn't been for John, the Department of Justice would not be named the Robert F. Kennedy Department of Justice. That was a John Lewis signature renaming, and a lot of people don't know that.
And so, Ms. Lee, what I was going to ask you is exactly along these lines. We know that Congressman Lewis has either authored or co-sponsored more than 1,100 bills during his 17 terms in Congress. I would deem both of you progressive activist legislators. And given that, one of the things we know that Barack Obama challenged the country with in his eulogy was, we don't have to choose between protest and politics, we can do both. And one of the last things publicly Mr. Lewis did was align with that by standing at Black Lives Matter Plaza. So I would love to hear from you, Ms. Lee. What are the other ways that protests can align with politics so that you all feel strengthened and undergirded by the movements in the streets, and vice versa, so that you all are legislating around the ideas and the progressive ideals that protesters have right now, and activists and organizers have right now, so that we can actually live and thrive in this country in a way that aligns with what Mr. Lewis would dream and imagine for us.
Sure, Angela. Well, I think most members of the CBC, I know these who are with us tonight are all activists also. Absolutely. And John was the activist personified. And, you know, in order for legislation to move, you have to have a movement behind you so that it can move. And then you have to have a movement that understands what the strategic moves should be, such as getting co-sponsors. Like TERRI's constantly getting co-sponsors for something all the time. They have to know how the appropriations process works. I'm an appropriator, so I have to let our young movement organizers know at this point, this is our deadline. What do we need funding for? Give it to me. Let's see how we work it. Go to these members of Congress. John taught us how to do all that because he knew how to legislate, but he knew we couldn't do anything without a movement. And a couple of pieces of legislation, a lot of people are really shocked when I tell them, John supports reparations. He supports HR 40. He came on quick, fast on HR 40. He didn't even blink. He understood that we had to repair the damage in this country. And most recently, mine may be one of the few almost the last bill he went on was HR 100, calling for a Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Committee, which goes with HR 40. John said, put me on it. And then when we rolled it out, you should see the press statement he issued. He talked about this is the next front of the civil rights movement in terms of reparations and I call it come to Jesus moment, the reckoning in terms of the 401 years of commemorating 401 years and its relationship to systemic racism today. And so John was really clear on that. And so I feel in a lot of ways so proud and honored that it was like 2 months ago that he did this on behalf, and we have a movement behind that, and HR 40. But also one thing John and I always talked about was defense spending. And I know that's a no-no to a lot of members right now, because defense contractors have jobs in their districts and we don't want people's jobs affected. So it's really hard to get any member, Democrats, to vote no on the defense budget, right? But John told me, and I come from California, and Ron Dellums, former chair of the Armed Services Committee, I worked for him for 11 years. There's no way he would vote for a defense budget that's now $738 billion. It's like, come on. And so John, years ago, this must have been 4 or 5 years ago, he said, Bar, I want to talk to you. And I went down and said, he says, I'm never going to vote for this again. I'm not voting for war. I'm not voting for this budget. And you can look at his record. I don't know how many years it's been. He said he wanted to be the first one up there voting no. He said, because we don't need this kind of defense budget that's taken away from domestic needs and human needs. And so he had a world view, and he had a very clear progressive point of view, because he knew in order to achieve racial justice and equity in this country, we had to have the resources, and he knew where the resources were, and that was in the defense budget. We talked about that a heck of a lot of time. I don't talk to a lot of members about that because I know, you know, where we are on defense in terms of the politics of it. But he and I could talk about that all the time. Finally, let me just say to TERRI, you know, TERRI has taken this movement and John's legacy to the next level. And she's carrying this baton forward in a magnificent way. I mean, TERRI is like driving some of us nuts from sun up to sundown, how she's gonna do this, how she's gonna do that. John needs this, we gotta do that. Yes, TERRI, we're gonna do it. But I'm just saying that because I think it was manifested in the beautiful ceremony that was held, that she talked about earlier, and the unbelievable procession across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Let me tell you, TERRI, I sat here crying because I had been 17 times walking with John across that bridge, and I felt like John should be walking across there. I should be there walking with him. TERRI should be there walking with him. We should be there. And it was just like this man, and walking with him across that bridge, I had young people from my Martin Luther King Jr. Freedom Center.
Always, which is great.
Always, and my grandchildren.
I mean,
always.
Literally 15, 20 kids every time.
And I was the only member of Congress that did this for 17 years. And so John would always pull them aside and find a room at the hotel, for instance, to talk to them for 30, 40 minutes, mentor them, encourage them. And so this year, I said, no, I'm not even going to ask John to do this. And he was there in March. Was this March there? He was there.
He came back for the 55th anniversary. He was
there.
And I mean,
and the failing health. And do you know, he didn't even wait for me to ask. He saw those kids and he told me I could find the time when I can meet with them. And he did that this year with our young people. And he came to my district. We did a book signing and we had 1,000 people. I have a lecture series. John came and he did that. TERRI came. TERRI did the lecture series, because what I've been trying to do is connect my young people to these great icons and warriors and leaders so that they know what their duty and responsibility is. And so he not only touched me personally and my family personally, but my whole district. Whatever Terry Sewell wants, Terry Sewell gets, and they tell me that. And whatever John Lewis was doing, I better be doing it with him or else. And that's the kind of magnificent legacy he leaves. And, you know, and it's just, oh God, I miss him so much, you know?
You know, I sometimes say to myself, how could I go on? You know, when you grow up in Selma, I mean, the legend of John Lewis is as memorable to me and the people who grow up there as any Bible verse or any family lore. It just is. You revere it. And while my job is to help advance the people that live in my district now, my job also is to protect the legacy that is Selma, Birmingham, and Montgomery. And what I love about John is John has sowed seeds of hope, inspiration into so many people. I'm not alone in this fight. I got a whole bunch of folks on this call, people in your listening audience who literally are disciples of John, and know that we have to pick up the baton and continue this march. It's not just about getting the Voting Rights Act back to where it was. As President Barack Obama said, it's about advancing it, moving it beyond that. How about making sure that voting day is a holiday? How about making sure it's automatic registration? So not just federal oversight, although that's job number one. We have to put the teeth back into the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and only Congress can do that. That's what the Supreme Court said in the Shelby versus Holder decision. We have to come up with a new Section 4 to determine what states have had a history of voter discrimination such that Section 5, pre-clearance by the Justice Department, is the enforceability.
Yeah, I am so grateful to each of you. As your former staffer, I am so thankful to have learned from all of you and to have witnessed the way in which you respect and love Mr. Lewis. I will give you one dirty little secret from our staff team that was exposed because Jamila, his deputy chief of staff, talked about it today. Their soul food lunches where they brought in food and desserts to their team. Congressman Cleaver, I hate to tell you, but during your chairmanship, Mr. Lewis missed a lot of CBC meetings, but he came for the lunch at the end and ate with the staff.
Let me just say something about Jamila real quick, if
Yes.
I can, very quick.
Yes.
John poached Jamila from my staff. Jamila worked for me for years and years and years. And I love Jamila. She came to my office as a volunteer after 9/11 when I was getting all these death threats. She just said, I want to help you, Congresswoman. And then I was able to hire her, and she was phenomenal. And years went by, and John told me he wanted Jamila to come work for him. And this was the only time that I was happy another colleague was poaching my staffer. I was so pleased. I said, John, I'm supposed to be upset, but I'm so happy. I'm so happy for Jamila. And Jamila has just risen to the occasion. She's phenomenal. I'm so proud of her and Michael and the entire staff. But that's what we have to do. And when Jamila and John, when John told me that, I said, oh my goodness, I can't say anything, but I hope I helped prepare her for you.
Yes, she represented him very well today. She really did.
Wasn't she great?
Yes, she was
I was so
excellent.
proud of Jamila.
At some point, I think we really need to recognize John's staff and Michael Collins in particular. I think all of them are great. Michael, I've watched him over the years take care of John Lewis. And the day that Michael pulled me aside, we were on the floor and came to talk to me as a pastor. Whenever somebody says, I need to talk to you as a pastor, I know that whatever it is not good. And so he told me what was going on, and I had to walk around for about almost 9 days with that heavy burden. I had begun to pray for John, and then John decided to become public. Actually, John didn't even want to take any chemotherapy at first, and so thank God he did start at a later time. But all of that was due to the work of Michael Collins, who put his life on hold and just dedicated his life to John Lewis. And there was a guy named Bernard Lee who was in Vietnam, came back from Vietnam, landed in San Diego, got a bus ticket to Atlanta, went into Martin Luther King's office at 334 Auburn Avenue Northeast, and said, Dr. King, my name is Bernard Lee. I'm with you until the end. Dr. King, who are you? What's going on here? He said, I belong to you. And Bernard Lee stuck to Martin Luther King, all the way through. He wasn't in Memphis, but anytime you see photographs, I have photographs with Bernard Lee, and the staffs are what makes us. And you know, Angela Rye and the staff we had was amazing. I think that Barbara Lee had a great staff when she was chair, and Julie is still with her, and who was amazing. So I think I don't hesitate to tell people that whenever they see us doing things successfully, that there are people who they don't see who are making it happen, and that's certainly the case with me, and it was the case when I was when I was CBC chair.
Yeah, you can't really discount the contribution that people who staff us make to making us who we are.
Yeah.
And so in that regard, I want to thank Angela for all of the work that she continues to do. Whenever I often tell her that, look, you know, you're not a staffer anymore, but she just persists in taking care of all of us whenever we need something. And so I want to take the opportunity to thank you and let you know that I don't take that for granted. I appreciate it, all that you do. And real proud of how far you have gone since you left the CBC, even though you have not left the CBC yet.
Yeah, Angela, I just want to say, if people find out I know you, they can't believe it. It's like, you know Angela Rye?
Like, I'm not even Angela Rye. And that, I hope that, like, I don't, I know this is about Mr. Lewis, and I'm saying this about him too. You all make us, and it's Miss Sewell's fault that I'm crying because she's here. And I told you every single time she's here, I cry. But I want you all to know how much we deeply love you and admire you and want nothing more than to carry on your legacy. So I wanted to do this so that people could see the humanity of Mr. Lewis, but to also see how wonderful each of you are. And so I'm just so thankful. Mr. J does say that, but I will always work for and with you. I will always have your backs, ride or die. And I mean that. And so does the rest of the team. I know all the CBC alums and the current team, we're all close. It's a sorority, a fraternity, and everything in between. And most of all, a family. And so we thank you so much. We miss CBC lunches. And we might crash one soon, but we love you so, so much. And I thank you all so much for doing this. I really do.
We all carry John in our hearts and our minds, and we will always be able to further his legacy. And we do it out of love. And he reminds us of that all the time because he just gave and gave and gave and was so willing to share the platform. I'll never forget the gold medal ceremony during the 50th anniversary when we gave a congressional gold medal to the foot soldiers. John obviously was the right person to accept it on behalf of everybody. But I went up to him and I said, but there's a Reverend F.D. Reese in Selma. And he goes, yes, Reverend Reese invited us to come. Please let Reverend Reese, he shared that platform. Do you remember that? That's John.
Yeah.
And all of that pouring into others, willing to share the light. That's why I know that his legacy will live on for future generations. And it's up to us to make sure that we live out and complete his march.
And one thing else I'll say about John is John knew his place, and when the women start talking, John was quiet, and I'm gonna leave it like that.
Yeah,
I'm trying to learn from John myself.
Yes, that's true. He was egalitarian. Angela, there's one thing I have 1 minute to just tell you one little story about John. And this has to do with the daughter of George Wallace, Peggy Wallace Kennedy. John introduced me. He said, Burr, this was on one of our pilgrimages. I want you to meet George Wallace's daughter. I said, oh, no, thank you. I know you're loving and kind, but you know, I know who this man was. She said, no, Barbara, I want you to see what repentance is about, and I want you to see what love is about. So he introduced me to Peggy. During that period, she was beginning to work with President Obama. You know, she was a Democrat, and she acknowledged her father, her daddy, and the terrible things he did, and said, I've got my life to live though, and I'm gonna do this on behalf of racial justice and equity. We became really close friends, okay? And John, year before last, Terry, were you there at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church? Okay, now John, Peggy gets up, and I brought her to my district too. And we did a lecture series, her, Lucy Baines Johnson, Donzalade Abernathy, and Carrie Kennedy. And Peggy was reluctant because I'm coming from the Black Panther Party, right? Wakanda. And so Peggy was reluctant. But John told Peggy, he encouraged her, he said, no, you go. Peggy came, there were a couple thousand people there. Peggy was the one that got the standing ovation. But anyway, back to Dexter Avenue. So Peggy had told me a lot of stories about her father, which were terrible stories, you know, but she really has been able to figure out her own path. And she, again, she's a wonderful woman. She was there when Terry mentioned being at the state capitol a couple of years ago and spoke.
Well, she was
But
actually she was there when we welcomed John. She was there just this past Saturday.
Yeah, so Peggy came to DC. We were talking about something, and I said, Peggy, you know, I hated your father. It's no secret. And I said, because I was working for Shirley Chisholm as a volunteer in '72, and I was about ready to leave the campaign because I was a young, very progressive woman who had never registered to vote, but because of Shirley Chisholm, I got involved in her campaign. I said, and she, and I told John this story, she suspended her campaign to go see your father who had been shot, and to go see him in jail. Shirley Chisholm going to see George Wallace. And I was gonna quit the campaign. And so I told her, I called Shirley and told her, I'm through, this is it. You know, you burned me once, that's it, I don't go 2 times. But she told me, Barbara, there may be some redemption. And John repeated this, you know, there's some redemption. You can't hate. Sure. And John kept saying, Barbara, you can't hate. I said, but I don't, okay. So Peggy told me about that. And so she says, Barbara, let me tell you this. She says, I was in that hospital room when Shirley Chisholm came to visit Daddy. I was there when he broke down and when he told her how he had to do right and how he had to do better and wanted to work with her and wanted to apologize. And so Peggy told me she was there during that whole discussion. And so there was a private thing between me and Peggy, but John knew about it, the discussion. And so at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, we were there during the pilgrimage. Peggy gets up, she speaks, right? And John looks at me, and I'm with my grandson and all my kids, and John winks, and I'm saying, yeah, Peggy's got it going on. She really is wonderful, boom, boom, boom. At the end of her speech, and I guess John knew this, that's why he turned and winked. She said, and you know, and she told the story about her daddy and Shirley Chisholm. And she said, and that young woman who was working so hard for this Black progressive woman for president is Congresswoman Barbara Lee. John stood up and he ran back and he hugged me. He said, yeah, Barbara, see, you see what I'm talking about, how love trumps hate and how redemption works. And, you know, so he gave me my lesson that day in Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. And he was the one who introduced me to her. And we stay in touch now. She's such a wonderful woman. My kids love her in the Bay Area. She comes, you know. So I had to share that story because, you know, John was really, and some of us who ain't about that kind of love, you know, all the way yet. John was one who taught us, look, you got to get to love. You got to understand that's the only way to justice and peace.
Hey, y'all, my phone is getting ready to run out of juice.
We're hanging up right now, Mr. J. Mr. Cleaver, it sounds like Congresswoman Lee is ready to write the next civility note. You should take a guest contributor. I love you all. I have already cried, so I have nothing left to say to you all except for get some rest. I love you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela.
Love you.
All right.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
See you, Terry. Go to sleep.
I am.